Welcome to The Energy Equation, the podcast that helps you take control of your health by focusing on one powerful question. How do I get more energy to live fully? I'm Ollie Patrick, and today's conversation is all about energy and aging. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to keep their energy as they get older and others not? The truth is, aging isn't set in stone. In this episode, we'll explore how your body's own energy systems work, why they start to slow down, and how you can fire them back up. So you don't just add years to your life, but you add life to your years. Joining me is Dr Nichola Conlon, scientist, PhD in physiology, founder of Nuchido, and a leading specialist in cellular aging and NAD research. We'll cover that later. Before we jump in, if this conversation does resonate with you, please hit follow and share it with someone. It helps us immensely to grow and to keep delivering these episodes to you. But for now, welcome Dr Nichola Conlon. You're in the world that is booming. The world of longevity is everywhere. But here we're talking about energy. And you're in this world of trying to improve longevity. Where does energy and how we feel connect with this field of longevity?
Well, I mean, everyone knows that as you get older, one of the first things that you start to lose is your energy. You know, you look at a young child running about and they are just keep going. It doesn't matter if they've had like no sleep, they will get up and they will go and they're full of energy. But as you start to progress throughout life, that energy just suddenly goes. It's just not there anymore. Yeah. And that's one of the top things that people will complain about as they get older. They'll say, you know, it's not just about the looks and the external appearance of aging, it's the fact that they can't be bothered anymore. Yeah. They've just not got that stamina, they've not got that get up and go and that they had when they were younger. So energy is so linked to aging. You know, it's one of the big symptoms, shall we say, of aging, a lack of energy.
I love that. And it's such a relevant piece. And I suppose we want to see how we can push back against that. Yeah. But that immediately brings us, before we get to longevity, about aging. So as I sit here now, I've got a birthday coming up, and I'm saying mostly that to the production crew here, so they're fully aware. But I've got a birthday coming up. I look older now than 20 years ago. What's happening to me as I age? What is this aging process? What do we understand about it?
Yeah, so it's funny that you said you look, because again, everyone thinks that when you talk about aging, it's about something that's happening on the outside.
Yes.
And the reason for that is because that's the most noticeable thing. You know, people can't see how you're feeling or what's going on inside, but actually everything to do with aging starts deep inside our bodies at the cellular level. Yep. So really, aging is what is happening inside our cells to cause everything that we see and feel and experience as part of the aging process. And ultimately, what it boils down to is we know there seem to be 12 key things that kind of go wrong in our cells that drive the entire aging process, and they're called the hallmarks of aging.
Yep.
And they're like I guess you could kind of call them the 12 failure points.
Lovely.
One of them is mitochondrial function, which is obviously very important for energy.
Yeah.
But really, you know, at a very simple level, these 12 things fail in our cells. Our cells are controlling everything across the, you know, the physiology of our body. So when the cells start to become damaged and fail, that causes failure across the tissues. And then that means we see and experience everything that we feel as the aging process.
Absolutely brilliant. And I say brilliant, brilliantly explained, not brilliant news.
Yeah, you know? No, it's not brilliant news at all, no.
And is that you know, because the hallmarks of aging was sort of this big defining moment that really defined why we've got a life expectancy. And those deteriorations, those 12 patterns of deterioration, are they happening from birth? There's been a recent study that came out from Finland about this sort of midlife window that from between 36 and 47, I think it is, there's the really critical stage. But am I breaking down cellularly from birth, or is there a point in my midlife where I go over the edge of the cliff?
I mean, you, from birth, really, we're constantly being exposed to damage. Everything in our environment is essentially trying to damage us. Yeah. You know, whether that's UV light from the sun, whether it's oxidative stress from our own metabolism, you know, chemicals, free radicals, things from our diet. Our bodies and our cells are like constantly being bombarded with, you know, chaos. Yeah. And actually our bodies have evolved to be very, very good at dealing with it. And we have, like, I always say it's like an army of repair like processes and pathways that's going around, making sure if there's any damage, it's repaired. Now, when we are young, this is like turned right up. And it seems that when we're younger, so we're saying like, but when I say young, like maybe below 20.
Everyone's clinging on what you say as young.
So as far as evolution is concerned, young was like below 20, because you have to think that our bodies actually weren't designed to be living the longer lives that we've got now. You know, average life expectancy for a woman is like 83. In a couple of 100 years ago, that was, we were lucky to reach our 40s. So everything in our bodies has been developed or designed, I guess, by evolution to think that we were probably only going to live to about 40. Yeah. So that then makes 20 like middle age as far as evolution was concerned.
That's a critical, I want to come back to that piece later because that is critical. So you're defining young in this sense, well, not defining, but below 20, we've got these incredibly good recovery, repair mechanisms heightened.
So basically, again, I always say, I think there's a famous, I can't even remember the name of the person, like a philosopher, which said that nothing in biology makes sense unless in the light of evolution. And that is so true when it comes to aging, because everything in our bodies was basically designed to protect us, to get us to childbearing age. Yeah. Because ultimately that is the purpose of our body. Very crude. But as far as evolution was concerned, we need to get to childbearing age, pass on the genes, job done. Yeah. So up until childbearing age, the body's like, okay, we've got to keep this army of repair switched on full, make sure that we are protecting the body, we're getting it to that point where it's in good condition to find a mate, reproduce successfully, have an offspring, and then kind of job done. Yeah. So it gets to the point where after childbearing age, the body's like, okay, I'm investing all this expensive energy into repair, but it should have done its job by now. So do we need to keep doing this? So some of the things start to get turned down, or some of those expensive energy consuming repair processes actually start to go the opposite way and start to cause trouble in the body. Yeah. But because probably were going to die around age 40, it didn't matter. Yeah. We never actually experienced old age or aging as we experience it today.
It's a fascinating piece, that, in terms of, there'll be a lot of people crying listening to this going, I'm just a bit past 20, I'm just a bit past 40. Yeah. But, clearly we've seen a change in environment, a change in sanitization, change in medicines, which has meant that we now have this life expectancy, 83 for females. Yeah. Is it just towards 80 for males? Yeah,
a little bit less for men.
So there's still that gap. But really what you're saying is our version of old age is a completely new phenomena. Yeah. To human physiology from an evolved perspective. Yeah.
As far as our bodies are concerned, this is like new territory.
Here's a 60-second thought. We often think of energy as something we can add: more coffee, better nutrition, another workout. But the truth is, you can't create energy without recovery. And recovery starts with sleep. Sleep is one of the biggest drivers of your energy system. It's when your body restores cells, balances hormones, and resets your nervous system. Without quality sleep, everything from focus to motivation and physical performance starts to dip. That's why Simba have focused on the science of sleep. Using data from over 10 million sleepers, they've engineered mattresses and bedding designed to help you recover properly. Their hybrid mattresses combine AeroCoil springs and Simbatex foam to support your body, keep you cool, and reduce partner movement. Simba have won over 100 sleep awards, including 6 Which Best Buys, and they offer a 200-night trial, a 10-year guarantee, and next day delivery. Head to simbasleep.com/energy equation to see how Simba can help you power up through better sleep. I've spent years helping people understand what really fuels their energy. And when it comes to daily nutrition, Vitals by Heights is where I start. Most of us still fall short on those key nutrients that support energy, focus, and mood. And that's where Vitals comes in. This is what a modern multivitamin should be. It's advanced, it's absorbable, and it's actually effective. It includes not just the basics, but 20 essential nutrients, including omega-3s and B vitamins, which are vital for brain health and energy metabolism. What sets it apart and why I love it is the science. It's formulated by doctors and dietitians, and it's backed by thousands of studies. It's clinically proven to work. It's built for long-term impact, not just short-term spikes. And as someone who reads the research and feels the results, I believe deeply in this. In fact, I believe in this product so much, I've joined the Heights team as their Chief Energy Officer because I believe they're setting a new standard in supplementation. If you're ready to kickstart your energy journey, start with Vitals. Get 20% off your first month at heights.com/EE or use the code EE20 at checkout.
As far as our bodies are concerned, this is like new territory.
Yeah.
Like we're living in a time that throughout evolution we've never experienced, and certainly the biology in our bodies was not designed for. Yeah. And yes, it does sound bad. Like everyone's going to be going, oh great, way past 20, so I'm done. But the good news is that all of those things that are contributing towards aging, or on the other hand contributing towards repair, these repair processes don't just actually like disappear from our bodies. It just seems that they get turned down or switched off, or more pro-inflammatory or pro-aging things get turned up. So what a lot of the research is looking at now is how can we kind of like rebalance this? How can we make our bodies start acting like they did again when they were young? Because those repair pathways haven't just disappeared. They haven't just gone. They just got turned down. So it's like, how can we turn it back up again? How can we turn the repair back on again? And I think that's a fascinating thing, because it's about how can we take these longer lifespans that we already have, but actually live them in good health.
I love that, because when you first went to those dinner parties and you said, I'm a longevity expert, they would be like, I don't want to live longer because it looks bloody awful.
Everyone would go, oh no, I don't want to live any longer. Why would we want to live forever? And I'm not going to lie, like some of the dinner parties I did go to at these like early longevity conferences where people actually did want to speak about this thing were all about that. Like people were sat there going, oh, are you going to get cryopreserved and, brought back to life, and you were going to live forever. And I was also a bit like, oh, okay.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that I want to go that far, even myself. But now I think a lot more people are understanding that this world is actually about, we're blessed thanks to improvements in modern sanitation and medicines and healthcare that we now have these longer lives. So why would we not want to live the life we have in better health? So we talk about improving healthspan, which is the proportion of our lifespans we're living in good health.
And that's something everyone can get on board with. And I think lots of people don't understand the difference between lifespan, which is literally how many years I'll be on this planet, and health span, which is how many of those years I'll be well. And what's that gap currently, Nichola, between how many years I'll live, but how many of those years I'll be in good health? But
it's big. So I always give the stat for a woman born in 2009, because that's when my daughter was born. So I always give the stat for her. And for a woman born in 2009, her average life expectancy is 83 years, but her health span expectancy at current rates, if nothing changes, is only 64 years. Yeah. So that is a huge 19-year gap.
19 years of ill health.
And when we say you're out of your health span, what that means is you've got multiple chronic age-related diseases. So these are things that once you've kind of got them, there's nothing you can really do about it. Yeah. And you're not able to live kind of a fulfilled and independent life. So, I mean, anybody who's got older relatives or parents that have, suffered with the health, maybe has had to go in a care home and be cared for, will know exactly what you mean to be out of your health span.
Yeah. Totally understand that. And that's the bit which no one wants an extra 10 years being in a care home.
Exactly that.
And that's when people get slightly confused with longevity.
Yeah.
A, that it's about this endpoint number, but B, that it seems to be running sort of tangentially to lifestyle disease.
Yeah.
In the sense that when I'm older, is it, I'm not dying because I'm old, I'm dying because I developed most likely one of the lifestyle diseases, cardiovascular disease, cancer, neurocognitive disease, metabolic disease, etc. There's sort of an argument to be looking at disease differently when we start to look at aging.
Yeah.
How do you view disease from a longevity perspective?
So when I first started getting into this space, one of the things that really struck me was the way people that were working in the longevity field viewed aging. Yeah. Because it was very interesting, because what they said, and obviously still say now, is that if you look at all of the major chronic diseases that we are battling, things like the cancer, the heart disease, the Alzheimer's, for all of those, the biggest risk factor is actually your age.
Yes.
Above everything else that we're told is bad, that we shouldn't be doing. Actually, it's age. Like literally putting on years is one of the worst things you can do for your health. So they were like, okay, so if age is the biggest risk factor, then does that not mean that all of these different conditions are like symptoms of aging?
this is an important distinction because it's saying, is it that I get those diseases because I'm old?
Yeah.
Or is it that I'm developing these diseases as a byproduct of aging?
Yeah.
Is that where you are taking a lens?
Yeah. So is it that if aging is the biggest risk factor, are all of these symptoms of whatever the aging process is that is in our bodies? So then what happens if we reframe it and say, well, what happens if aging is the disease?
Yes.
And aging is the root cause? And I was like, wow, this is a long time ago that I heard this. And I was like, this makes a lot of sense. Because even if you look at trying to treat individual diseases, even if I think there was a paper that came out that said, even if you completely eliminate a cancer, we'd still only have around an extra 4 years of healthy life expectancy, because all the other things would still come. We'd still get Alzheimer's, we'd still get this. But all of them have a really common denominator here, and that is cellular health that is being affected by aging. So this is when it's kind of started to be looked at through a bit of a different lens, because the view now is like, okay, so instead of having all these separate research groups looking at all these separate diseases and never kind of talking to one another, and we're trying to knock one out at a time, but the others still exist, why don't we almost have a different group of people, which is, I guess, the longevity scientists, where we're kind of taking a step back from being very specific at in studying a very specific disease, and let's look at what happens if you could slow aging even just a little bit at the cellular level. Would it have an impact on multiple age-related diseases in one go? I.e., would it actually improve our health span?
Yeah, and that sort of idea of trying to treat aging as a disease, how is that being welcomed by traditional medicine?
It's mixed. I think, first of all, aging is not classified as a disease, which poses a lot of problems in the longevity space with things like trials to try and prove that by slowing biological aging you can impact disease, because to do a clinical trial you have to have a primary outcome that is looking at a disease, and aging is not a disease. So it's like you have to be, there's other clever ways that people are trying to set up trials to try and work this out. But
do you think it should be?
Do I think it should be classified as a disease? Do you know what? For me, I don't really care what it's classified as. I mean, what it's like a name, it's like a label, isn't it? I think the key thing is that the evidence is so stacked up to show that as you get older, you will get more of these diseases. And there's now evidence coming out to show that if you can reduce biological age, like the age which your cells are at the inside, so effectively reduce the damage and switch the repair back on, it positively impacts all those things. So it's kind of really doesn't matter what anyone calls it. Like the evidence is showing that it's quite clear that if you can do something to slow aging, or even if you don't even call it slowing aging, let's just call it switch repair back on.
Yes, yeah.
Frame it the other way around. If you can do something to keep your body repairing, then it has an impact on all those things. So
really good. I like that. And we've got a bright audience. So, I'm keen we sort of dive into what is that boosting that repair mechanism, turning it back on look like. So, again, I'm aging. Which repair mechanisms are most notably failing in my soon to have a birthday body? and what are the sort of practical ways in which we're looking to intervene with those or improve them? So
I think the 12 hallmarks that I spoke about, Some people try to say some are more important than others, but actually when you look at it, they're kind of all interlinked. It's like a big chaotic mess where one gets worse, it makes the other one worse, and this gets worse. So they're all kind of interlinked, and I do think it's important in biology to always remind ourselves that there's never one thing that causes anything. Biology is so complex that there's just so many different things going on at once, despite the fact that a lot of people, especially in the wellness space, will say, oh, there's this one thing, and if you fix this, you're going to sort everything. That's never the case. But when it comes to the hallmarks of aging, I think a few just to kind of highlight are first things like DNA damage.
Yep.
So we know that our DNA is constantly being damaged. We know that we've got an amazing army of repair enzymes that go around looking for damage. And when we're young, they will fix this damage before we can even detect that it's happened. Yep. It's like incredible. Like it always blows my mind. It's getting really geeky science here. It blows my mind, these DNA repair enzymes. But we get around 10,000 pieces of DNA damage every day in every cell, and our body just fixes it.
Isn't that
before we
brilliant?
even know it's a problem.
So our DNA, again, are the code for us in every cell of our body.
Yeah.
And the lives we lead, it damages it. But we have this incredible, extraordinary ability to repair that damage.
It's literally like goes around. It's like a little enzyme. I always say it's like a little Pac-Man going around, like looking, is there any damage? Is there any damage? Oh, there's a bit, quick, fix it. Plug the gap, done.
Amazing.
Before we even know. But unfortunately, that's one of the things that seems to get turned down as we get older. So this repair isn't as efficient.
Yep.
And obviously, as you mentioned, DNA is the blueprint for the cell. It tells the cell how to behave. And when you get things like mutations, this is when you start to get cellular dysfunction. This is when you start to get mutations that are causing things like cancer. So it's really important that we have this process going on and looking for repair, but it is getting turned down.
Yeah.
Now, that actually leads to one of the other hallmarks, and this is something called cellular senescence.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of the time, the body can repair the damage, but sometimes the cell just becomes so damaged that it kind of sets off an alarm bell and says, do you know what, this is a write-off. Like, it's past the point of repair. Let's just get rid of it. And you'd think that it would make sense for the body to like completely remove this damaged cell,
Yep.
but actually it doesn't. What it does is it just puts it to sleep.
Yep.
And that's called senescence. And this is one of the things that our body, our evolution has designed to be very quick and good at dealing with an issue when we're young, but then actually goes on to cause us a lot of issues as we get older because we were never going to live this long. So when we're young, making a cell senescent, just putting it to sleep is like, quick, dealt with the problem. Don't need to invest any energy in recycling it or getting rid of it.
Yeah.
We'll just leave it there. But as we are getting older now, and as we're getting into much more advanced stages that we never hit, what we now see is that a lot of our tissues are full of these senescent cells.
Really interesting.
And often people call them zombie cells, because what we now realize is that these cells don't just sit there like asleep and quietly.
Yes.
Not only are they sitting in the tissues, taking up space, not fulfilling their function, but also they're secreting inflammation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, when we were popping off in our 40s,
Yeah.
wasn't really an issue.
No.
Didn't have that many of these cells to cause a problem. Now, someone in the 80s, you know, their tissues are full of these senescent cells. And this is why in older people, like their muscles, the heart, the lungs, all of their organs are not functioning as well. They're having failure of these organs because they're not as strong anymore, because they've got all these cells sitting there doing, just taking up space, but not actually doing the job, and then secreting a lot of inflammation that's then damaging all the cells around them.
So interesting. I always think of this a little bit like rubbish bags.
Yeah.
In terms of,
Yeah,
I use
literally.
things in my house and I put them in a rubbish bag. But if I keep that rubbish bag in my house, it starts to stink.
Exactly
You know,
like that.
and it's sort of that stink then builds and builds and builds. And I think, again, there's words in here that people will encounter but have never really understood.
Yeah.
So these senescent cells are effectively the debris of cells get damaged, and cellular damage is normal, right? We damage cells by just existing.
Yeah.
So we can't hide from cellular damage. But if we don't repair that damage effectively, those cells effectively shut down. They become these zombie cells, but they don't just sit there doing nothing. They start to stink. And that
Exactly.
stink is inflammation.
Yeah.
And inflammation, lots of people still don't really understand that word. So how do we frame inflammation, which is often talked about as a good thing, versus inflammation talked about as a bad thing? And that's confusing for lots of people.
Yeah, so chronic inflammation is another one of the 12 hallmarks of aging. And, inflammation, like you say, it's a double-edged sword. Like, in most cases, it's beneficial.
Yep.
Like, we need inflammation. It's part of our immune system. It's a way that the body can fight, a virus or a bacteria, or it can, if you've cut yourself, you need inflammation to initiate that repair.
Yeah.
But the best way to think of it as we get older, and the problem that it becomes, is that every time you have an inflammatory reaction, it doesn't quite get turned off enough.
Yes.
So you kind of get left with a little bit of it switched on. Now, over our lifetimes, especially now we're living longer, this little bit of inflammation that's left switched on kind of is like smoldering away in the background, because inflammation is good when it's a short acute burst, but if it's left on, it's kind of it is a bit damaging to our cells.
Yeah.
So over the course of our lifetimes, we kind of get this little bit of inflammation left on, which builds and builds and builds to the point where we have this chronic smoldering inflammation in the body that's actually damaging. And then this is made worse by the fact that we have things like senescent cells, which are then actively pumping out a lot of inflammation that there shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So inflammation is actually so important in driving the aging process that in the sort of longevity space, we call it inflammaging.
Inflammaging. That's a beauty, isn't it? Yeah. I love that. I also like smouldering. Smouldering sort of brings a new edge to the chronic inflammation.
Good,
it's
though,
very Hollywood, smouldering.
Yeah,
it doesn't sound good. But that level of inflammation, this sort of smouldering background, inflammaging, then, because when we look at the big complicated diseases that do take people's lives, cardiovascular disease, cancers, they all seem to have a strong correlation with inflammation.
Yeah.
So here we start to see that the cellular damage that we've got less good at repairing with these zombie cells, which are, which didn't function anymore but sit around, leads to this background tone of, an unwanted immune response that then seems to be a fertile ground for disease to operate within.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to get cheerier in a minute. We're going to have to,
I hope so.
But this is human beings. This is going on in everyone listening.
Yeah, and I think the other one to mention is mitochondrial dysfunction. That's probably another one a lot of people have heard of. We know our mitochondria are the energy production, the powerhouses in our cells. They turn the food that we eat into the ATP, which is the energy that all our cells need to function. And when we are young, they are super efficient. They are like shiny new power stations, making lots of nice, clean energy. But as we get older, even they start to fail. So again, I use the power station analogy, saying it's like a power station that should be going through, decommission because it's become old. It's not efficient anymore. It's given out a lot of toxic waste.
Yeah.
So this is literally what we see in our mitochondria. They're not making the same amount of energy from the same amount of food that we've always eaten.
Yeah.
There's less energy in the cells, which means the cells can't function as well.
Yeah.
So you can start to see how, if you get some dysfunctional mitochondria, then that's going to have an impact on your DNA. It's going to damage that.
Yeah.
Then maybe that might cause senescence, and the senescence is causing inflammation, and that's going back and damaging the DNA, and you get like this vicious cycle that kind of escalates.
And this is why we're mortal.
Yeah.
And understanding this becomes critical, because already in understanding these mechanisms, we're going to start to understand maybe how I could understand where I'm at in my aging process. But you're also, in a way, building therapeutic targets, right? In terms of, if my body's getting worse at repairing the DNA damage, how can I increase that? If I've got these, senescent cells, how do I get rid of those? If I've got this inflammation, how do I get rid of those? So two parts to that. Mm-hmm. One is, when I said it's my, I look different to 20 years ago, a big area that's boomed that I know you're closely aligned with is testing aging.
Yes.
Which, because clearly these biological processes track against how long I've been on the planet to an extent. There's now this way of people getting their biological age versus their chronological age.
Yeah.
Can you touch on that a little bit in terms of where's the science at with that? And should our listeners be thinking about checking how old they are on the inside rather than just looking at whether they look magnificent on the outside?
Yeah. So I always think this is a really interesting area, because
if you've been listening to our previous episodes, you'll know your energy tomorrow comes from the investments you make today. And one of the most powerful investments you can make is how you wind down in the evening. Because a good night's rest isn't just about sleep. It's about giving your body time to recharge, repair, and reset. And that's where Bond Charge comes in, the global leader in premium wellness innovation. Their red light face mask helps you recover at a cellular level while you relax. You simply wear the mask for 10 minutes in the evening while reading or relaxing in bed, and let the gentle red and near infrared light support your skin rejuvenation, boost your circulation, and promote repair. It's lightweight, portable, and fits perfectly to your face, making it an effortless addition to your evening routine. Discover the self-care that powers better energy. Head to bondcharge.com and use the code EE15 to save 15% on everything from Bond Charge. When we talk about energy on this podcast, we usually think about food, sleep, recovery, mindset. But what about the stuff under the surface, the biology that's driving how you feel? Well, that's where Stride One comes in. It's the UK's first internal diagnostics membership that links your DNA, your gut, and blood biomarkers into one intelligent system. I've done the test on my guests, and I'm telling you, it's a game changer. You don't just get a load of numbers. You get proper science-backed guidance, like how your gut health might be impacting your energy levels, or whether your genetics mean you need more B vitamins or more magnesium. And it's all put together in a beautiful dashboard that makes the complex stuff actually make sense. And every quarter, you get a one-on-one with a real expert to talk through it all. This is what real, proactive health looks like. You can now get a special offer on the exact same test I've used and that our guests are using by heading to getstride.com/energy or just check the link in the description.
I think it's an area of science that's developed that makes this a bit more relatable to people when you're linking all this science back to an age.
Yes.
Because, age is something, it's aging and age and birthdays and numbers are something that people get and understand. It makes sense. So biological age is the age that you are on the inside. So this is how old your cells are, as opposed to the chronological age, which is just the age on your birth certificate.
Yes.
Now, the really interesting bit is, whilst you can't do anything about the age on your birth certificate apart from lie about it.
You're absolutely in for that.
Your biological age moves. It's kind of flexible. And a lot of people, when you talk about this, are like, oh, okay, I'm not sure if I want to know how old I am on the inside. But from a scientist's perspective, this sort of discovery that we have two ages, we have this alternative age, which is how old we are on the inside, proved two really important things within the longevity space that were kind of a bit of a pinnacle moment, or that were argued over. So the first thing it proved is that you could actually measure aging.
Yes.
Because for a long time, everyone said, great, all this research you're doing, you're trying to slow aging. How on earth do you actually prove that you're doing this?
Yes.
Because you can't set up a clinical trial where you just look and wait for someone to die, and see, has it helped?
Yeah.
Did they have a better life? What are you comparing to?
Absolutely.
So, first of all, it meant you could do something to actually measure it. But the second thing was that it seems that when you look at biological age, there always seems to be a discrepancy in many people between what their chronological age is and what their biological age is. So, for example, somebody could be chronologically age 50, but you look at the biological age and they might be more like age 60, or they could be the other way where they're more like age 40, which shows they were aging slower. And this discrepancy, what it proved to us was that aging is not a fixed, programmed thing.
Love that.
Which was because for a long time it was argued that aging was it was kind of like a program that once you were born, this button was pressed and it was playing. And it was kind of nothing you could do. Once it had started, all downhill, it's set. It's a programmed thing. And therefore, why is anyone bothering trying to do any research into this? Because it's hardwired into us. But the fact that a lot of people's biological and chronological ages are different shows that it's not fixed, because if it was fixed, they should always be the same.
Spot on.
And if it's not fixed, because we do have these differences, it shows that there are things that are happening in the cells that are either slowing down the aging process or speeding up the aging process. So if there are things going on in the cells, then that means scientists like us can go, okay, what are they? And can we impact them? Can we switch them back on? Can we turn them down? Yeah. So that was a real moment where it was like, okay, this shows that aging isn't fixed. It's like a malleable process. It can be sped up and it can be slowed down. So let's work out what we can do. And that's where a lot of the research on the hallmarks of aging came from, because it was like, okay, we need to work out what's going on to speed it up or slow it down. And it's these hallmarks. If you can turn them down, the biological age tends to go down. If you turn the hallmarks up, the biological age tends to get worse.
Yeah. And that, I think, is very logical in the research space.
Yeah.
It gives you a therapeutic target.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I have changed the way in which these cellular processes taking place.
Yeah.
They've quickly moved into consumer market.
Yeah.
And we have we got some that measure the length of my telomeres, some that measure glycans, others epigenetics. There's sort of different ways of doing it. I think, without going to the different methodologies, is sort of picking the one that you trust most and rolling with that, how it changes over time.
Yeah.
But these are separate to what lots of people are getting, which is a metabolic age, which might be based on your muscle mass, or a comparison of how you're doing versus a peer group. These biological ages are looking at, as you say, one of these markers of the hallmarks of aging, and then working out whether the behaviors you're adhering to or changes you're making are improving it. So it's a separate field.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people, when I talk about biological age, they go, oh yeah, stand on my scales. And my scales tell me I'm younger.
Exactly right.
I'm like,
which is a good sign.
If you want to go with that one. There's lots of different ways of measuring it. And again, this is an area of science that is really new. So I think, yes, we're seeing them come out as consumer tests. I personally think that's a good thing if people then know what to do with the results. It's fair enough you get an age, but if you don't know, like, oh my goodness, it's really old, like, what do I do? It's kind of pointless if there's not some sort of follow-up to be like, okay, this is how you can help do something about it.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really important. But yeah, there are a lot of different ways to measure biological age. A lot of them involve looking at different patterns within the body. Epigenetic age testing, that looks at patterns of genes that are switched on and off, because what we know is as we get older, we seem to see what we call epigenetic drift, which is if you look in a younger person's cells, they have like a pattern of genes that are switched on that are quite youthful and promote repair. They promote anti-inflammatory pathways. They promote kind of good things.
Yes.
As we get older, it drifts towards a more negative pattern, which has things that are more pro-inflammatory, repairs switched down.
Yes.
And you can see that quite predictably. So when you take a blood sample from someone, you can kind of look, okay, they have this pattern. Is that typically seen in a young person or an old person? That's a very simple way of explaining how it works. Same for glycans. So looking at your glycan age, that's looking at patterns of glycans, which are sugar molecules on your immune system. And again, they change in a very predictable way. So you can take a sample from someone, look at the pattern and go, oh, okay, that's definitely something we'd see in a 70-year-old. And then you look at the chronological age and go, oh, they're only 50.
Yeah.
This is not good.
Yes.
And then you can kind of pick apart and be like, okay, what's causing this? Like, is it something in the health? Is it in the lifestyle? What is it? Is the one that's better than the other? I think it all depends on how much data has been put into building that test. For me, I always favor the glycan age test, because they've got a huge amount of data that's built the kind of algorithm that then links to the prediction of what age you are. Yeah. But I think really you kind of need to look at different tests that look at different parts of the body, because some people, different parts of the body will age quicker than others. Different organs can age quicker than others. The one benefit about looking at glycans is it's kind of measuring your immune system age or your inflammatory age. And what we know is that inflammation tends not to be localized. It is across the entire body.
Yep.
So for me, I think that's quite a good way to start, because it's looking at something that's reflective of the whole body rather than like a telomere test, which is only very specific to whatever that sample has come from.
Yeah, makes sense indeed. And I think, so let's imagine I've run one of those on me. So my birthday's coming up. First thing to note is if it shows me as 30 years younger than my chronological age, we're not yet confident that my life expectancy booms to being 110.
No.
So, but we're hopeful.
We're more hopeful that you'll have less age-related diseases, so that you'll have a better health span. So the biological age seems to be a more accurate predictor of health span than chronological age, which is already a strong predictor.
That's brilliant. So that bit's great. So let's go the opposite way. Yeah. I've done my biological age. I've got a much older age than my actual, passport says. What then, from a behavior point of view? Clearly, here we're leaning into things like exercise, sleep, nutrition, from a lifestyle point of view. Before we get into some of the more advanced theories, what is going to be the big factors that are going to slow my rate of aging or potentially reverse that bad result to a good result? Yeah,
I mean, you hit the nail on the head that it is a lifestyle. And often people look at me waiting for some magic advice that they've never heard before. And I'm like, no, unfortunately, most of your biological age is influenced by lifestyle. It's estimated that around 80% is down to the simple things that we all know are either good or bad for us.
Yeah.
So like the diet, the exercise, the sleep, things like that. Usually if we do a biological age test on someone and it comes back high, when you start talking to them about their lifestyle, it becomes very, very obvious what it is that is causing it.
And the big one, of course, smoking, alcohol.
Yeah.
Big ones.
Big ones.
What are the ones that weren't as logical to you when you first started researching this? Mm-hmm. So I would, again, there's great data on cardiorespiratory fitness, muscle mass, great data on not smoking, alcohol. What are some of the things that our listeners sort of maybe haven't lent into that are showing good data?
Okay, two things. So one might be surprising.
Ooh.
So quite often we will have people who think they're doing everything right. So they will come in They're typically men.
Scandalous.
But they will come in and be like, they'll be like, okay, I'm doing all this biohacking, I'm doing my ice baths, I'm doing my this, I'm doing that, and they'll list all this stuff. And they'll come in being like, all like, yeah, I'm going to be like super young. And then it's like, no, actually your biological age is like 10 years older. And they're like, what? Like, but I'm doing everything. And it's like, yes, but please take me through your day. And then they go through the day and it's like, okay, they're having a 20-minute ice bath followed by a 45-minute sauna, followed by like an hour's intense cardio, followed by a 20K run, followed by, and then they're also running a business and they're like sleeping for 4 hours, but it's fine because, they've got a HR, whatever. And it's like, actually the body quite likes balance. So yes, we know that some of these things are very good for us, but not to the extremes. The body doesn't like the extremes. The other really interesting one's exercise. So again, we know that exercise is incredibly beneficial for healthy lifespan.
Yeah.
But not to the extremes. So we see in people that are pro athletes who have the biological age test done tend to come back way older. That's more the case in women.
That's really interesting.
Female pro athletes tend to come back with a biological age higher, and they're often gutted because they're like, I spent my whole life not going out, not drinking, eating healthy, training, like living like a saint as far as they're concerned.
Yeah.
And they're coming back older. But again, it's because it's taken the biology to that extreme where it actually becomes too much. It's actually stressful on the body.
And these things are often what we call hormetic stresses. So we're trying to create a small amount of stress to create a reward in terms of repair.
Yeah.
But if that is an unrelenting volume
Yeah.
of stress, it becomes then compoundingly negative. And
Exactly.
People will struggle with that because they think more is better.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lovely message to hear that, there is a dose required of these things, but it's not an endless dose.
Yeah, there's a balance.
Yeah.
And the other one, which I guess isn't I think it's not spoken about as much, but it is one that we see and people are often quite surprised by is perimenopause and menopause in women.
Okay.
The impact that has on biological age is very profound. Quite often someone's biological age can be tracking along really nicely, then as soon as they hit perimenopause, it just goes through the roof.
By what sort of volume?
So there was a study done that showed that in a 6-month period, looking at women going from perimenopause into full menopause, they had an average increase of 9 years.
Wow.
And that was the average. So some women experienced a sudden 20-year upshoot in their biological age.
Over what period of time?
Over 6 months.
So 6 months, they biologically aged up to 20 years.
20 years was some of the
Was the extreme
individual, but
outliers. The average was 9.
the average was 9 years.
This will not land well.
No, but
Right.
this goes a long way to explaining why a lot of women feel, they'll say, do you know what, I just feel like I've hit menopause and I feel old.
Yeah.
Like they literally say that. They're like, I can't put a finger on it, but and that's a lot because of estrogen is very protective in women.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden it plummets. So it kind of puts your cells into a bit of chaos where they're like, whoa, our signals that were protecting us have kind of gone.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a very interesting one where we often see sudden changes. Obviously, that's not lifestyle. It's not something you can do about, but there are things you can do to help it. But
and on that, because all my female listeners will be like, Ollie,
Crying.
don't leave us here. But and because now we're seeing the sort of the proliferation of hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah.
If I add estrogen, and I replace that hormone, which is increasingly shown to not have the health consequences people worried about back in the day, does that counteract that?
Yeah, so that was shown in the study. So using hormone replacement therapy completely reversed that biological age increase.
Nicola, thank you.
So
you saved me. But I mean, and again, that decision would need to be taken on an individual basis.
Absolutely.
But it goes to show the power of these hormones that were designed to be around for us to reproduce.
Yeah, but also it's about the awareness that this is happening.
Yeah.
Because I think for a lot of women, they're like, we feel like this, but there's no explanation. They know it's the hormones, but there's no explanation of why is it making them feel so old? Why is it suddenly aging their skin? Why are they suddenly have no energy?
Yeah.
But it is because our hormones actually play a huge role in the aging process, which is, it was always thought of the other way around, that as you age, it impacts the hormones. But actually it's not. It's the hormones decline and then that impacts the aging process. It's actually the complete opposite way around.
That's a brilliant perspective. And really, and again, I think there'll be a lot of people who will connect with that and be thinking about how they optimize that. Assuming outside of HRT and gender specifics, I know you've spoken a lot about sleep. You know, you mentioned earlier on that person who's pushing too hard.
Yeah.
Here we spend a lot of time trying to understand sleep. Where does sleep and aging sit?
I mean, sleeping's probably one of the biggest anti-aging hacks you can do. You know, if you're not sleeping well, or if you're trying to invest in all sorts of other expensive things, it's probably not going to, you know, pay dividends as much as it would just trying to sort sleep.
Why?
Now, again, looking at evolution, sleep's one of the only things that evolution hasn't got rid of in pretty much anything, because it's so important. And that is because when we go to sleep, it's like our body literally flips a switch that goes into rest and repair mode. So our circadian rhythm, which controls our 24-hour sleep-wake cycle and many other things in our body, it's estimated that around 20,000 different genes get switched on and off during this period. Yep. And a lot of those that get switched on during sleep are the rest, the repair, the restoration. The body's like literally having a reset overnight. And we actually see in people that are sleep deprived that they have a higher biological age. The other thing that's really interesting is looking at people that do shift work. Their risk of mortality, actually, and also chronic age-related diseases is way higher than in someone that doesn't do shift work.
Yeah. It's a tough one, this, because
people can't do anything about it. It's their job, I know.
And because then we got to look at, if you can't control sleep. Yeah. So I think we are, again, across the energy equation, we're trying to get those sleep rituals and routines and management of caffeine, alcohol, that's a resource. So optimizing sleep is critical. If someone can't do that, if their financial situation means they've got to work in a job, or their career of choice is shift work, then they can dial up these other activities. That's the key principle.
It's the awareness, having the awareness that if your sleep isn't so good, that actually there's lots of other things that can be beneficial that you can also be doing. So it makes it a bit more important for that specific person to maybe look at the diet, look at things to reduce stress, look at maybe supplements, things like that, if, they feel like they need some support and they just can't do anything about that sleep.
Yeah, spot on. And I think there's one other area that we both are interested in that seems to be showing good interest, which is red light. Yeah. I was just at a conference at the weekend, and red light, which felt faddy years ago, is sort of increasingly booming into the public spectre. Can sitting in front of a red light genuinely make me younger?
Yeah, I agree. A lot of people did think it was faddy, because it seems so simple.
Yeah.
How can sitting in front of a light make me younger?
Yeah.
Or do something good?
Yeah.
But again, just to think about this, your circadian rhythm, is controlled by a little group of cells in your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and they are sensitive to light. And it is the light you see in the morning and the different wavelengths of light in the morning and the evening that are stimulating those cells to switch your body into completely different modes.
Yes.
And that's just the light from the sun. So then you think, well, actually, of course it's believable that sitting in front of red light could actually do something. And now we're understanding a little bit more how it does do it. Like a lot of our cells have receptors for different wavelengths of light. In particular, our mitochondria. They're very sensitive to different wavelengths of light, like infrared light. And when they're stimulated, that can actually cause a lot of beneficial pathways to be switched on. You get things like mitochondrial biogenesis, where we start to produce more mitochondria. It improves the energy efficiency in the mitochondria. So things like red light can actually help to improve the health of the cells so that they start making collagen again.
Brilliant.
And red light's also known to help reduce inflammation. So not only are you improving the health of the skin cells to produce more collagen, but you're also getting rid of the negative things in the cells that are degrading the collagen. Yeah. So it's kind of like a double whammy of benefits. I'm a big fan of red light. I sit in front of a red light panel a couple of times a week. So yeah.
You've got a panel that you use?
So it's just like a sort of full length panel, and I just literally stand
You literally sit in front of it with as much skin visible as possible.
Yeah, you can also get, like, if people don't want to have the full length body ones, like a lot of people have them for their face.
Yes.
I think the main thing is just looking at like the quality of the manufacturing. I think there's a lot on Amazon now that are like, all they like don't really do much. It's about the different wavelengths of light. You want to have like LED red light, which is a shorter wavelength that kind of touches the surface of the skin. But then you want the more infrared, which penetrates a bit deeper. That's what's going to be targeting cellular health.
There'll be a lot of people sprinting to the red light face mask store.
Yes.
But the science here on the red light, these are robust mechanisms.
Yeah.
Whether the hardware you're looking at does those things will be down to a bit of due diligence.
Yeah, a bit of due diligence on that.
It's also the reason we measure something called VO2 max on some of our guests on the energy equation, because cardiorespiratory fitness seems to have this incredible correlation with longevity. Do you think that's because of the role of cardiorespiratory fitness in having more mitochondria? Would that be a logical jump?
Yeah. I mean, cardio is known to increase both the number of mitochondria and also their efficiency.
Yeah.
So if you've got lots of mitochondria, you've got more energy. If you've got efficient mitochondria, you've not only got the energy, but you've got less toxic reactive oxygen species being made.
Yeah.
So when those mitochondria are working, you're not getting as much oxidative stress, which is then damaging to everything else in the cell.
Absolutely brilliant. You're a master of a particular molecule in aging. You're a master of many, but there's one that's booming up all over the place, and it's this concept of NAD.
Yeah.
First and foremost, what does it stand for?
That's a good question, because many people that are talking about NAD don't actually know what it stands for. It stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide.
Rolls off the tongue.
And that is why we call it NAD, because we don't want to be saying that every time.
And I think lots of our listeners might have encountered a clinic saying, I'm going to do an NAD infusion, or maybe even an off-the-shelf supplement or an NAD precursor.
Yeah.
It's a question I get asked about a lot. Can you give us a quick synopsis of NAD, why it's vital, and should we be interested in this?
Yes. So NAD is one of the areas I love talking about. I've studied it for many years. I've published a lot about it. And you're right, it's completely having its moment now. Everyone's talking about it. It's become a buzzword, but it's not something new. This is something as scientists we've known about for a long time. It's a molecule that's naturally found in every single cell in our body. And it's involved in many, many critical processes. It's estimated that it's involved in around 300 different reactions in the body. So it does a lot. But the two things that it's most famous for are firstly energy production. So in our mitochondria, we have a pathway called the Krebs cycle, which is one of the pathways that takes the glucose from the food that we eat and converts it into the energy in the form of ATP that our cells need to function. Yeah. And NAD is a very critical part of this pathway. Like if you didn't have NAD, this pathway wouldn't function and we'd literally be dead in 30 seconds because we wouldn't be able to respire. So that's how important it is. So for a long time, we've known about NAD because of the Krebs cycle. People have learned about it in biology. Some people go, oh yeah, remember that. But the other thing that we're now learning about it much more recently is actually its role in cellular maintenance and repair.
Okay.
So it turns out, as well as its role in energy production, what NAD does is it acts as a fuel for quite a lot of these repair processes. So you remember we're talking about the army of repair that goes around. Well, NAD actually acts as a fuel for a lot of those processes. Yep. So for example, our DNA repair enzymes, some of the key repair enzymes, literally need NAD to power them.
It's the fuel of the repair mechanism. Yeah.
There's also another group of, sometimes people call them the longevity enzymes, the longevity proteins in the cell. These are called the sirtuins. And these kind of go hand in hand with NAD, because what the sirtuins are is, you can imagine they're like sitting at the top of a cascade, a bit like the coordinator of an army or whatever. And when they are switched on, they will switch on all these downstream repair pathways. So they'll switch things that lower inflammation on. They'll put the DNA repair enzymes on. They'll switch recycling on in the cell. So when the sirtuins are on, all these things down below happen. Yeah. But again, the sirtuins absolutely need NAD to function. NAD is the fuel for the sirtuins as well. Yeah. So you can see it has quite a big role in a lot of things in the cell that are very important for cellular health.
Vital. And it decreases as we age.
This is a problem, yeah. So it's estimated that it halves every 20 years. And that's from birth. So we were talking earlier, when do you start aging? Well, actually, in terms of NAD, it halves every 20 years from birth. So by the time you're 20, you've only got half the amount that you had when you were born.
Yeah. We need to finish on a big high later on.
Yeah.
Because there are some absolute clangers in here. So this vital fuel for my repair mechanisms, for this biological delay of aging and all damage, I've got half of the level I had at birth at 20, and then half of that again at 40. Yeah. So this is why it's become the molecule of target for those who say, well, I don't want this aging process.
Exactly. So scientists said, well, if we've got this molecule, it's not great if it declines for our aging process, then why don't we just not let it decline?
Spot on.
Can we top it up? And to get a very long story short, yes, you can. So that's the good news.
That is a very long story short.
So scientists said, okay, you can boost NAD. And when they were doing it in cell studies, they were seeing that if they increased the levels of NAD in old cells, it literally restored cellular function and the cells started acting younger again.
So those jobs came back. So it was, which proves it was a shortage of NAD that was a definite cause of some of these challenges.
Absolutely.
So that makes it the molecule of the anti-aging movement. So when I walk down the high street and someone says, Oli, get an infusion, get a supplement, etc. And again, you have some thoughts on this, having published in this area. Is an NAD infusion, which is the rife through the wellness sector, the luxury sector, does that work? What's the best way for me to get my NAD levels up, both naturally and through supplementation?
So it was thought that the easiest way was, first of all, not even an IV, but just take some pure NAD as a powder, put it in a capsule and swallow it.
Boom.
Done.
Then the gut.
That would have been great. But NAD is very unstable. It's naturally an unstable molecule. So not only is it charged, but it's what we call a redox molecule. So it sometimes you'll see NAD called NAD plus and sometimes it's NADH. And that's because it flips between different forms. And that's naturally how it's meant to work to be able to perform its function in energy production. So very unstable. So you take pure NAD in a capsule, there will be no NAD probably in the capsule to begin with, but also if there was, by the time it gets through the gut, there will definitely be no NAD.
Yeah.
So this is where IVs became popular. People said, okay, let's cut this bioavailability issue. Let's just infuse it directly into the blood.
Straight in.
Done.
Boom.
Big problem is, NAD does nothing in the blood. Like nothing.
Okay.
So NAD has to go into the cells to actually perform its function because that's where the mitochondria are. That's where the DNA repair enzymes are. That's where the sirtuins are.
Yeah. So it's an intracellular molecule.
Yeah.
And is that, so if I do an infusion and I measured my NAD levels, is there no science that shows that would increase my NAD levels, or is that the missing piece?
This is the missing piece. So the issue is that not only is NAD very unstable, but it's also a very big charged molecule.
Yeah.
And cells are like little fortresses. They literally do not let things pass in and out very easily.
Yeah.
And because NAD doesn't really need to be on the outside, many of our cells don't have any channels to kind of let it in and out.
Gotcha.
Most of our NAD is actually made inside of the cells where it's needed.
Yeah.
So the problem that you have is you're infusing a huge amount of NAD into the blood, and then it can't actually get into the cells. Now, there is some evidence that there may be some channels on some of our cells, like our neuronal cells, that may have the channels to let it in.
Okay.
So we do know it might get into some cells, but NAD is required in every cell in the body.
Yep.
So the really amazing thing here is that despite the huge amount of clinics charging a lot of money for these IVs, there is a huge lack of clinical data or evidence looking at what actually happens to the NAD. Where does it go when it goes in, and does it actually boost NAD? So to date, there are only 2 clinical studies. One of them shows that the NAD is actually completely broken down into precursors, which are like the smaller building blocks. And then it's the precursors that are actually taken up into the cell.
Yep.
Which is relevant to point out because these precursors are actually just vitamin B3.
Yep.
So people go, okay, well, it's still boosting it, but it's like, yeah, but you could just take vitamin B3.
It's in a multivitamin or B complex. Yeah.
The second study, much more worrying, that's come out is that, first of all, not only did the IVs not increase in NAD inside the cell, but they actually caused an inflammatory reaction. And again, this is something that I've kind of been talking about as a bit of a theory for a while, because if you speak to anyone that has an IV, have you had an NAD IV?
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you feel?
Nauseous.
Terrible. Yeah. People have heart palpitations, they're sweating. They have to put it over a very long time.
Yeah, it's very slow.
And I've always had this theory of like the doctors will tell people that, oh, it's fine, it shows your body needs it, shows you detoxing and all these words. And I'm like, I'm not sure. Maybe it's showing your body that it's not supposed to have a huge amount of a molecule that's meant to be inside the cells, outside the cells. And maybe that's the body going, oh my goodness, why is there a huge amount of NAD suddenly in the blood that's not meant to be there?
Yeah.
And this latest evidence shows that it was inducing an inflammatory reaction. So we're seeing a raised level of interleukins, so these inflammatory cytokines, which is not what you want to do. You do not want to be raising them. And this kind of supports that theory that I've had, that the body's seeing it as a danger.
Yep.
It thinks that there's been some sort of trauma and all the cells have burst open and all the NAD's gone out. So it's going, oh, let's initiate an inflammatory reaction to fix it.
Yep.
So my view on them is, it's not an opinion. It's at the moment, the science doesn't show that the NAD gets to where it needs to be.
Yep.
In fact, some of the evidence is now showing it may actually be harmful. So I do think that needs to be spoken about more. And this is where, precursors came about. I guess the other really famous way to boost NAD is a precursor, something like NMN.
Yep.
So NMN is probably the most famous. A precursor is basically one of the raw materials that your body uses to make NAD.
Yep.
So it's smaller, it's not
it's
charged.
It's the flour to make the bread.
Yeah, exactly. It can get into the cells. To some extent, there's still problems with things like NMN getting into the cells. And then once this precursor is in the cell then needs to actually turn it into NAD.
Yep.
And the most fascinating bit about all of this is that a lot of people think we get our NAD from our diet or from the outside, but we actually don't. We get all the NAD that we need is made inside our cells, and it's constantly made, broken down and recycled, made, recycled, made, recycled. We have this wonderful recycling mechanism in our cells called the NAD salvage pathway.
Yep.
And that means that as NAD is used as a fuel, it's broken down into a precursor, which is then literally scooped back up and recycled back into NAD.
Fabulous.
And as we're young, this works amazingly. But unfortunately, as we get older, this pathway gets turned down. So there's a very specific enzyme in this pathway that actually declines with age. And this is what causes our NAD to decline, which we now know.
Energy is everything. And every week on the Energy Equation, we'll give you the tools to boost yours. Tap follow now and join the community learning how to eat, sleep, and live for more energy. Now, back to the episode. So this is not a shortage of bread. It's not a shortage of flour. It's not enough ovens.
Yeah, exactly that. If you are going into the bakery and you're going, why is my bread production gone down?
Yeah.
And you look and all the ovens are broken.
Yeah.
You would not go, let's order some more flour and ignore this problem.
It's such an interesting, it's where we rush. These sort of represent where the wellness sector potentially rushes to an intervention based on the first piece of science.
Yeah.
And of course, this is an evolving landscape.
Yeah.
You're at the bleeding edge of this with the research you're doing. And, we're talking about small numbers of studies, but everyone's urgency sort of creates these commercial vehicles very quickly.
Yeah.
And we're just got to be cautious.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what I always say, science changes.
Yeah.
And we've got to be open to be like, okay, this is the best that we knew at this time. Like for a long time, everyone thought the best thing is to use like an NMN precursor.
Yeah.
But now the science is changing and we're going, oh, actually, if we just take NMN or just keep ordering the flour, it actually builds up in the cell.
Okay.
And then you get problems in the cell because the cell goes, we've got piles and piles of NMN or piles and piles of flour and we need to get rid of it. So then we've started to see things like methylation problems in people that are taking these huge doses because they're not addressing the root cause of the problem. But that's because we didn't know what the root cause of the problem is. But now we do. So now we're seeing like a second generation of kind of NAD boosters come through that are actually aiming to fix the root cause of the problem.
Yes.
And switch back on the enzyme in the cell. So, get the ovens working again.
Extremely exciting.
Keep that analogy.
Extremely, I like that analogy. And if I don't want to do the supplement, anything that would naturally target that enzyme or the bottleneck?
Yeah, really interestingly. So 2 things that we know are really good for longevity actually do this. The first is exercise.
Love it.
High intensity interval training and also resistance training have been shown. Secondly, fasting. Now, if you think about it, both of these things make complete sense because you're putting the body under a little bit of energy stress.
Yep.
So the body's kind of setting off an alarm bell saying, uh-oh, don't have enough energy coming in. We need to produce more. And also, not only do we need to produce energy, but we need to switch on repair. And what two things do that? NAD increases energy and it also switches on repair. So exercise and fasting both actually increase NAD production by switching on this enzyme that makes NAD in our cells, and we know that they do this.
So good.
Naturally.
And that would tie into why people feel energized, not just this potential health span longevity benefit. It's a brilliant dive into a fabulous topic. I've got to try and draw back to our listeners, and they are thinking, oh my God, I've got half my NAD at 20 and menopause sticks 9 years on me and everything's inflammaging. Let's get back to those things that we should be really diving into. And I think what I'm, is coming through clearly here is aging is a process that starts from birth.
Yep.
So this isn't the preserve. Longevity science isn't for those in their 60s. I'm retiring next year. I'll start thinking about longevity. This is about behaviours we accumulate over our lifespan.
It is, but just to caveat that, it's never too late to start either.
Love that caveat.
Yeah,
we
it's
can
never
see
too early
improvements
to
at
start.
any stage.
But even if someone's sitting there going, oh, it's too late, it's absolutely not.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And so let's give our sort of listeners the ultimate sort of, 5 things that they should be doing. I probably need, because we haven't done much on nutrition.
Yeah.
So, probably we hear an awful lot about fasting.
Yeah.
But, if you had to give me one nutritional behavior that was going to be good for anti-aging, what would that be?
Increase the number of plants in your diet.
Love that.
Yes.
Okay, so give me a number over the course of a week.
30.
30. That pulls on some other discussions we've had here. And that's largely for those different phytonutrients and also the gut. So that's the sort of combination of feeding all the gut bacteria plus the different nutrients.
Yeah. My background was in drug development, and the reason I left that world is because I often saw that a lot of the natural molecules that were things out of plants worked way better than some of the drugs.
Yeah.
And literally, when we talk about food being nature's medicine cabinet, it really is. There's so many powerful compounds in plants.
Yes.
Now, this doesn't mean you need to become vegan and not eat any meat.
Yeah.
This is just about increasing the number of plants and the diversity of plants in the diet, because the more diversity that you can get in there, the more diverse all these different molecules that are helpful to our cells, the more you'll be getting on a weekly basis. And also the more you'll be feeding the good bacteria in the gut, which then influences inflammation, let's get that word in there, across the entire body.
Fabulous.
So we do know that the more diverse and the higher number of plants that you have, then you will tend to see a lower biological age and just less inflammation across the entire body.
Amazing.
The other thing about diet is the protein debate.
Yep.
I don't know whether...
They probably we're often finding people are protein insufficient.
Yeah.
So we're, as a target for retaining lean tissue, managing hunger.
Yeah.
We find often people are inadequate on protein. Where would you sit with that from an aging point of view?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that's sort of argued in the aging field. So some people say you want to cut down on protein because protein actually puts the body in this state of like grow and be wasteful.
Yeah.
It switches on something called mTOR, which is great if you're growing, but not so great for aging.
Yes.
So sometimes when you're young, if you're really consuming far too much protein, especially too much animal proteins, we do see there is some data that may suggest that may be harmful. But as you said, most people are genuinely deficient.
Yeah.
Especially, and it kind of flips in that over the age of 60, protein definitely becomes better for longevity than working against it. So I think, although there is an argument in the space, most people, it's actually just make sure you get enough protein.
Yeah. Have you got a number that feels too high, but below 60? We normally talk about grams of protein per kilogram.
Yeah. Well, I think they estimate it's about for the average, average woman or man, about 45 to 55 grams of protein per day.
Okay.
So you're looking at 2 good-sized portions of meat or fish or plant-based proteins a day.
Gotcha.
And it's actually alarming how many people don't get that, because we're focused on a lot of carb-heavy foods.
Enormously. That would be on the lower end of the spectrum.
That's the lower end. That's like, I always say it's trying to make that realistic for people.
Yes.
A lot of, talking about 30 plants, a lot of people can't eat 5.
Yeah. I mean, my God. And that's 30, and that would include herbs and spices. And so before people start panicking.
The good way to get this in is like salads, fruit salads, putting herbs and spices on things, putting nuts, seeds, all of these things count. So, if you made a salad that's got different types of salad leaves in, it's got some olives in, it's got some nuts, it's got some seeds, you can quite easily get 15 different types in there in one meal.
Brilliant.
So yeah,
love that one. So from a supplement point of view, so we've got let's steer away from deliberately targeting NAD directly. Which nutrient seems to have the greatest impact on aging from a supplemental perspective?
Omega-3 seems to be a really good one, and it's something that I always say supplementation is quite a personalized thing.
Yes.
I hate it when people say to me, what supplements do you take? And I'm like, well, I take them because
the ones I need.
Yeah, they're for me. Because I've done, genetic testing and blood testing to see what I'm deficient in.
Love it.
So I think that is firstly important. If you're taking something, you need to understand why you're taking it and if it's for you. But there are certain things that most people just seem to be deficient in. One is omega-3. You've got your omega-3 and your omega-6. One's anti-inflammatory, your omega-3, and one's pro-inflammatory, your omega-6. You can kind of look at the ratio of those. Most people have too much omega-6, which is driving inflammation. And the more omega-3 you can have, it kind of pushes the bad one down. And the problem is in our modern diets, we've got a lot of ultra-processed food, which tends to have more of the pro-inflammatory omegas in. So if you can increase omega-3, it does seem to lower inflammation, which again we know is very important for aging. So omega-3 is one that I would say. Vitamin D, there's some evidence there, paired with vitamin K2. That's something that again is one that I kind of would say most people can get away with, having a benefit from that.
Love that.
So those would be my go-tos. If you want some more kind of out there ones that are longevity focused, that I think have got some good evidence, something like, have you heard of spermidine? Spermidine, I think, is the one to look out. It's a polyamine, and it's got some really great evidence for switching on a process in our body called autophagy. So that's the cellular recycling process that gets rid of the junk. It's the same thing that's activated when you fast.
Love that.
So, it's obviously, I'm not saying just a shortcut to something. I do think that fasting has its place. I think that some people maybe again go to the extremes with it. I don't think the fasting needs to be as extreme as some people think to get some of the benefits, but spermidine is a kind of a nice thing you can also add to try and kind of chemically, shall we say, switch on that process in the cells.
Really interesting. And that fasting piece is really interesting in terms of that became the big vehicle. And with fasting, we've seen gender differences in terms of, the difference between biological sex and people's response to that. Is there, in the longevity community, an accepted time scale in which I shouldn't be encountering calories to really potentially turn up this process that you've mentioned, autophagy, which is where I clear out some of that potential unwanted cellular debris? So I think for a long time it was thought that you kind of had to go 16 hours. That was kind of the gap. And now we realise that's probably only men. Although actually even in men it's maybe 14 to 16 hours. You want to be trying to go with, between that last meal of the day and the first meal to get so
some
14
of those.
Hours to 16 hours, no meaningful calories. So water, black tea, maybe. Great.
Exactly. Okay. Women seems to be less, looking more like 12.
That's interesting.
12 to 14. And it's, again, I think there's a lot of things in this space that seem to be a little bit less for women. We're looking at the data now with ice baths and things like that. Seems to be a little lower, higher the temperature, not so low. Again, it makes sense with that, just our physiology. Women's physiology is a little bit more stable. It doesn't like the extreme ups and downs, whereas men's physiology can react a little bit differently to that. So even with the fasting, the ice baths, I think in women it seems to be a little bit more not as extreme. But I mean, 12 hours for a woman, it's not that difficult.
Yeah.
You know, have your last meal at 8 p.m., have your breakfast at 8 a.m.
Yeah.
You've kind of switched some good repair mechanisms on and some autophagy on
Really
overnight. And even if you're not looking at fasting, but just not snacking
Yep.
as much, you know, and know that things like constantly eating between meals is putting our body in a state of glucose stress. It's having to be like, oh, come on, lads, get the repair stuff out again, get the digestion on again, we're off, you know. And it means that you don't have that period in between where your body can do something else,
Yeah.
you know, more beneficial. So it's even the little simple things make more benefit than we think.
I love it. From an exercise point of view, one thing.
Oh, exercise. Again, different with men and women. I think in women, so I'll talk about women specifically because I've been looking at this a lot. Our mitochondria work very differently to men's, and it's a lot of people in the space will talk a lot about doing zone 2 training, this aerobic metabolic training.
Yeah, which is relatively light intensity, could carry a conversation,
Yeah.
bit breathless, moderately hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, we're starting to see really good for men, but women actually don't seem to get as much benefit from that because our mitochondria are already well adapted for that type of training.
And this is from a longevity point of view.
This is from a longevity point of view.
Yeah.
Women see we need a little bit more high intensity training to push. So women's mitochondria like to burn fat more than carbs generally. When it comes to exercise. So if you can actually push them out of that kind of like slow, you know, grind type exercise into like a bit more high intensity, it pushes them to be more metabolically flexible and have to use some of the carbs. So if you can flip between those two states, it's much better. So a bit of high intensity interval training is good for women.
Brilliant.
But when they're older, so after menopause, resistance training. Because the protective effects of estrogen, which means our mitochondria are actually better than men's. They're better than men's in reproductive years. But that protective effect of estrogen goes. And then you need to start doing things like resistance training because then that basically gives the same signals that estrogen has been given to kind of keep our mitochondria healthy.
Really interesting. So for females, HIIT, premenopause, resistance training, post-menopause, males, zone 2.
Yeah.
Again, from a longevity point of view.
From a longevity point of view, you kind of want to be doing a bit of everything.
Yeah,
but if you could
ones.
emphasize things, or you know where the emphasis may need to switch at different points in the life, it definitely changes for women.
Brilliant. Hot or cold?
Ooh, both.
Oh.
I mean, hot sauna has had a huge amount of beneficial research showing that it helps everything from cardiovascular disease to lowering inflammation. I think the evidence for sauna, so being hot, is more profound, as in there's a lot more research and evidence over long periods with many people than things like cryo and ice baths. But I think we're also seeing a benefit with those, but the research hasn't been done as much.
Yeah.
So it's less numbers, less papers, but I think there is a benefit there as well.
Fabulous. So we keep seeing lots of different, again, biological differences between males and females, which is great. You know, there's been a big lag in the data on females traditionally through just the lack of research. From the aging perspective, what are the big differences you're seeing between biological males and biological females?
So women seem to be protected a bit more from aging, but only up until menopause.
Yeah.
So women seem to be protected and then it kind of drops off. Men kind of seem to go a bit more steady. But actually, although women will live longer than men on average, they actually have a shorter health span. And it is thought that it's a lot to do with the protective effects of estrogen. So this does make it a really important conversation for women about hormone replacement.
Yeah.
Because hormone replacement has traditionally become something that women have been scared of because of all the, you know, negative press around it. But really we're now learning that it's actually much more important. And the risks are really much more minor than what people once believed or what was kind of falsely put out there.
Yeah.
So there is a big difference. When you're looking at it from a cellular level, not only are men and women physiologically different for many reasons, but at a cellular level, we're different. So if you look at our mitochondria, for example, we know that a woman's mitochondria and a man's mitochondria actually function quite differently. And that's due to the effect of estrogen again. So if you look at the surface of the mitochondria, you've got all these little estrogen receptors on them. And the estrogen receptors actually make the mitochondria open up channels that allows more fat in. So women's mitochondria are actually very good at using fat as a fuel compared to men's.
And is that a genetic difference? As in, or is it if we put estrogen into a male's biology, it would be the same?
Yeah, it's more of a genetic difference because it's the number of receptors there. Because obviously men and women both have, men have a bit of estrogen, but it's the ability of that body to use estrogen. And women's mitochondria, it's the receptors that are on the mitochondria that then open these channels that let the fats in. And also increase the activity of some of the enzymes which oxidize these fatty acids. So that bit of our fuel production in women is actually way more efficient than men, who tend to have to rely more on the traditional use of glucose and glycogen.
So female biology would effectively be better at fat burning. So that might lend into better long-term capability to deliver energy, with males being more reliant on glycogen, being more able to do short bursts of higher intensity type work.
That
makes sort of evolutionary sense to a certain extent.
It's again, everything goes back to evolution. It doesn't matter what you talk about in biology. You're like, oh yeah, that's what evolution designed it for.
And are we waiting for the data on females who've been on hormone replacement therapy, what that looks like? Because its sort of proliferation and how accessible it is relatively new. So we're sort of waiting to see what the real health span, longevity and quality of life impact is. We're building that database, I assume. Yeah,
I think as with anything with women's research, it's so behind that the information that we do have is all based on very small studies. But that when looking at biological age itself, I guess with women, we saw in the study where biological age increased due to menopause when they replaced estrogen and hormone replacement therapy, you got a complete reversal. So it does seem like, and again, it makes complete sense. If it's estrogen that's having all these protective effects, then if you replace it, you're kind of fixing the problem.
Brilliant. Wrapping up, lots of our listeners are tired, and we're seeing rises of burnout.
They're not tired from listening to us.
They're loving this.
They're all tired now.
They are running out of gas. They are tired. And we're seeing rates of fatigue rising. Are we misunderstanding burnout as potentially we aren't managing some of these cellular processes of aging? Are these things, the mechanisms of inadequate repair, not managing this inflammation, are we misunderstanding that aging is actually really this big feature of driving how we're feeling from your perspective? Yeah,
I think so. And I think people, again, it's back to the way we're living our lives. We're living our lives in such a way that we are chronically on the go all the time. We're chronically in this fight or flight state. Our body wasn't designed for what we're living today. We're giving it a lot of new challenges in terms of the way it has to use its energy. So I think, again, it's all about just thinking, maybe what were we designed for? How was our energy designed to be used? How we were designed to produce energy? Not all the ways that, the current ways that we're living. So I think a lot of us probably are experiencing burnout, but we're just so used to it that we just think it's normal. Unfortunately.
And to me, that's why longevity science is relevant today. What we're talking about here is not about these extra years, not necessarily about health span. We think that's going to happen. But these are toolkits to improve the cellular energy you have today in whichever format you wish to deploy it.
And keep it.
And keep it. Fantastic. That has been a fantastic, wide-ranging insight into longevity, the science. Hugely grateful for you coming on. So thank you so much, Nichola.
No, it's been great. Thank you, Oli.
Real delight.